Chapter 171 Scouting Dago's Villages. Dax left after his fourth ale and watched as the innkeeper went door to door, handing out chunks of ham to the villagers. This was a good village if you were a bandit. They knew how to keep their mouths shut and their heads down, so they didn't draw the attention of the authorities. Plus, they were willing to make a trade to get what they needed. Some had too much pride for that, and you couldn't trust a prideful man not to do something dumb. Did you get the news you needed? Princess Alexis asked as the commander returned to the camp, smelling vaguely of cheap ale. I did. The village is starving, there are no boys or young men left, and the nobles have claimed most of their girls as well. They have no love for king or country. But most importantly, there is a major military training facility northwest of the village, across the river. That is going to be too much for us to deal with, but if we can embed some scouts in the area, we should be able to send reports of troop movements the moment they leave. Good for us. Good for anyone we can contact. Dax reported. I trust the cost wasn't too high. A single kilo of smoked ham. I believe that we should send men to the village tomorrow with a few sacks of barley for planting and some more essentials. Not enough to raise suspicions, but enough to keep the locals quiet. They should let us operate out of here for a while if we do,
he suggested.
Princess Alexis considered the options, then nodded. We won't be here more than 4 or 5 days before it's not safe anymore. But if we need to come back later, I want the villagers on our side. The next morning, the scouts were sent out, along with a pair of more social soldiers who would make the delivery to the village. They were sure not to send anyone who had the signature Signia blonde hair, which was a bit paler than the rich gold of Dominic's hair and horns. That would make it too obvious that they were foreigners and not bandits or deserters. Commander, Princess. We've got reports of a military unit moving out. 100 infantry, no vehicles. No confirmation yet, but the scouts who went to the village suspect that they're one of the so-called procurement teams that scour the villages for hidden wealth or military-age residents and collect the livestock and crop tithes. The scouts reported late that evening. Princess Alexis smiled. How far are they from their first village stop? They are stopped for the night, 10 kilometers from anything. They normally start at the far side of their rotation, so they can herd the animals straight back to the military camp. He explained. The princess took out her topographical map of the area, and the soldier pointed at the spot the unit was resting. Skip the artillery. Send 20 scouts on horseback before it's dark and eliminate them. Take everything, she ordered. The mechanical horses were draped with cloth as an attempt to camouflage them and disguise their silhouette on the skyline when the riders were laying flat on their backs. So, there was some hope that they wouldn't immediately give the unit away. But it got dark fast in the hills, and Dominic was left waiting uneasily in the dark for reports from the unit. Finally, the report came in. They got them all without any casualties and stuffed them in an old ice shed, then buried the door. With some luck, it will take a few days or a week before anyone finds them. The runner finally reported. Good work, gentlemen. Settle in for the night, and we will wait for more reports of troop movements. Princess Alexis congratulated him. Dominic woke the next morning with Princess Alexis wrapped in his arms, snoring quietly as the sun came in through the window shutters. It was a shame to have to get out of bed, but the morning reports would be ready soon, and he wanted to know if anyone had reported the soldiers missing yet. How long it took them to send a team looking for the soldiers would be the baseline for their response time to any other attacks that were launched in the region. I'm awake. I just didn't want to get up and face reality yet. Alexis informed him quietly a few seconds after the snoring stopped. That's fine. I wasn't ready to get up, either. But I suppose that we should see what the scouts have found this morning. Today's dress was nearly the same tan color as the dried leaves in their camp, and Dominic made sure that Alexis' outfit was perfect with the decorative armor she wore before heading out. It was odd to see her in such light armor, given her status as a paladin. Her formal armor was nearly impenetrable, but in this, she would have to rely much more heavily on barrier and mage armor type spells for defense. Good morning, Lord and Lady. No movement reported from the military camp this morning. However, we have seen an opportunity. They receive a train car of recruits once a month, according to the locals. It's due in just a few days. The recruits have all been conscripted, and they're kept under lock and key until they reach the camp. The villagers suggest that if our group of friends has the manpower, nobody would be heartbroken for their train not to make it to the camp. Commander Dax reported. Then the commander paused. There was another request. I don't know if it's a good idea, but the boys want mortar launchers in rifle form. You know, ones they can fire while moving or standing. It would be easier than setting them up. Like firing fireworks at their friends? It wouldn't be even remotely accurate at longer ranges if you're not planting it. But if you want to just shoot people in the face with a mortar, I don't see why I couldn't make them. Dominic hesitantly agreed. This was either going to be a terrible or a brilliant idea. Commander Dax smiled as Dominic seemed to accept the idea. We collected a lot of clay from the river and filtered it to get rid of debris. We can cut it into sheets if you need. I don't know what it takes to make the tubes, but they look like they're just tubes, and the mortars are the magic part. Dominic nodded. If you really wanted, you could light the mortars and throw them at people. You might die if you don't have a good arm, but you could do it. How would you light them? Dax asked, confused. There is a rough spot in the tube and flint on the mortar fin next to the wick. You could light the fuse with a lighter and throw it as it starts to fly. But don't do that. It might blow up in your hand. Actually, give me a minute and I think that I can make a mortar rifle with a trigger and all. Like the old flintlock rifles, it just needs to ignite the mortar. I imbued the fuse with black powder to help it light, so only a small spark is enough. Dominic agreed. Dax patted him on the shoulder. Trust me, it will be brilliant the second time we use it from horseback. I make no promises about the first time. Chapter 172. Safety measures? Dominic considered what it would take to make the tubes quickly and efficiently. A handle mounted to a tube with a hole in the side, where a rough rotating striker could slide along the side of the loaded mortar, would do the job. He wouldn't even try to enclose it, just teach the teams how to load them safely, with the striker moved out of the way. These weapons would be insanely dangerous, not only to their enemies but possibly to the users as well. But the men were intelligent. They would figure it out soon enough. Plus, this version could be kept loaded. Take it out of storage, aim and fire, then drop it back into your storage cube or reload it. The simpler the design, the better. Dominic finished the design, then made a cutting template out of the copper sheeting he already had. It would cut the clay like a cookie cutter, and then he just needed to bend it to shape and assemble the launchers. He could probably even get the unit to help make their own, and he would finish them. That would save a lot of time, and if the goal was to have 500 mortar launchers, it was the best option. Commander? I need helpers. Some to roll the clay into thin sheets, then reform the scrap clay after I stamp out the pieces. Then I need a few to bend the copper tubes and handles into shape, so I can assemble them later. If you want to equip whole teams of the regiment, this is the only way it will happen in under a month. Dominic explained. Dax nodded. I have a few with some mechanical skills as the sons of knights and barons. We will get it handled. A few minutes later, clay was rolled thin on a table, like biscuit dough, and Dominic cut the pieces, then turned them to copper and let them gather the scrap. The pieces were moved to a bucket, and a pair with hammers and wooden dowels bent the copper into a tube and capped the end with the attached flap. Dominic would have to braze that and attach the handle pieces later, but 90% of the work was done. Over and over, they cut and stamped until afternoon came around, and Dominic started the final assembly of 100 units. He still hadn't even made more ammunition for them, but by night, he should be ready to teach the unit how to use them, and then they could go test them on the first army unit they found moving around in their territory. Alright, there are two basic things to remember when using these. I put a wooden stick in this hole, so a preloaded mortar doesn't fall out. Remove it before use. The striker is stored in the ready position, and there is a bit of cloth around the tube to keep it from striking the mortar accidentally. That also gets moved before use. Make sure the striker is in this position and nobody is on your right. Remove the safeties, and do not point the mortar downward. It's not a rifle, the fit isn't that tight, and it could slide down the tube far enough to disengage. Once you have fired, ensure that the striker is rotated back into position. It should be, but if there is damage, it might not rotate smoothly. Drop another mortar down the tube. Thump it on the ground to get the mortar to the bottom, and then put it back on your shoulder and fire. The men chosen for the first mortars practiced the motion dozens of times using rocks instead of mortars. Once they were sure they had it, Dominic had them cover the striker hole and gave them the first round of mortars to load. Now, put the safety rod in them to hold it in place and put them in storage. I will make more munitions right away, so you have spares. Those will detonate either on hard contact with something or at 200 meters. The casings are ceramic, and they're full of ceramic balls, so they're meant to take out infantry, but they will also punch holes in most steam vessels. Any questions? He finished. The team smirked. No, we've got it, boss. The boys have been practicing without them since you first explained it this afternoon. 20 mortars in the camp was great, so this should be even better. And we will be able to see what we're shooting at. The opportunity to test them came the next evening, just before sundown. A team had been sent out, traveling south along the river to meet up with a larger group that was supposed to come along later in the week, according to the scouts who had been visiting with the locals. At first, the locals had been reluctant to discuss anything that would get the patrols attacked, but a little persuasion by the natural sons had gotten them to reveal that it had been 6 months since the last time they had anyone of recruitment age, so not a one of the young soldiers being deployed was from their region at all. Once that started to sink in with the locals, they were much less averse to providing information to the bandits who supplied them with food stolen from the soldiers. It was a trade of necessity. The regiment didn't mess with their farms. They didn't report the fact that all of their food was being donated from the bandits. Commander Dax will lead the strike team today, all armed with the new mortar launchers. Good luck, Commander. Collect as much data as possible, and we will see you soon. Dominic informed them. Princess Alexis cleared her throat. Actually, we will join them and watch from a distance. We need first-hand knowledge of how they are working in practice, or we won't be able to effectively deploy them in a larger battle. Understood. Well, gentlemen, it looks like you've got a couple of observers. Just give us some time to get in place, as your mechanical horses are faster than our legs. Chapter 173. Bait and Switch. Dominic and Alexis moved on foot so that they weren't risking one of the regiment's mechanical horses if they should get caught while traveling. They shouldn't be at too much risk. They both appeared to be nobles and could act the part, which would make them less likely to be mistaken as deserters. But if that were the case, they were both well armed and armored. It wouldn't be too difficult for either of them to take down a small patrol if the patrol wasn't using any magic. The light was fading, so they would pretend to be setting up camp along the route that the patrol was going to take, not far from where the men were expecting to launch the ambush. But like all well-laid plans, this one did not survive its first encounter with the real world. You, setting up the tent. Who are you, and what is your business here? A deep voice demanded. Dominic put the mallet down and stood to greet the visitor. This is the best road, if you can even call it that, from Staptentave to Midgex. Our convoy was attacked 2 nights ago, so my wife and I are making our way on foot, of course. Dominic replied. And who might you be? The soldier repeated, as Dominic had skipped that part of the answer. Earl Nick of Totbu. Whom might I be addressing? Dominic asked. The soldier frowned. He didn't know any Earl of Totbu. In fact, he had no idea where Totbu was. But something about this strange man and his wife, traveling alone and on foot, without any retainers or guards, seemed wrong to him. Boys, search them. I do believe that we've got a pair of new volunteers for the camp. The unit commander instructed his men with a grim chuckle. Dominic smiled at him. I believe there might be some misunderstanding. The soldier sneered and opened his mouth to retort, just in time for Dominic to pull his pistol and put a bullet through his forehead. The patrolman froze, unable to process the fact that this young nobleman had just murdered a major from the Dago's army in cold blood. Then, explosions tore through the outer edges of the group, and Dominic's hand flew over the action of the revolver as the closest guards tried to rush him. Alexis had a mace and shield equipped, both glowing with holy magic. Ambush. Bastards set a trap for us. Someone was shouting in the distance as the sound of hooves on soft dirt joined the explosions. Then rifles were firing, and Dominic found that he had enough room to hurl fireballs at the enemy. The sweeping charge by the cavalry had launched 100 mortars into the general vicinity of a group of 500 soldiers, who hadn't even seen them coming in the fading light. Calling the situation a battle was being extremely generous to the Dago's soldiers' odds of survival. Dominic felt a sharp pain in his shoulder as a crossbow bolt hit his mage armor spell, but it didn't break. That was sure to leave a bruise tomorrow, though. He added the necessity to increase the level of the sorcerer's spellbook to his list of future tasks, and then hurled an arcane blast into the crossbowman, healing the bruise as it formed. Beside him, Princess Alexis whistled the retreat call, and the cavalry broke off their attack, firing a few final rounds and then charging toward her and Dominic, who hurried to pack the decoy tent back into his storage cube. It was a stolen Dago's military tent, but he wanted to use it again later. They were grabbed by the mounted riflemen and swung up behind the riders for the charge back to camp, while Commander Dax laughed. That might have actually worked better than the actual plan. They were so distracted by the possibility of getting to capture a noblewoman that they weren't even watching the perimeter. Every eye in the patrol was on the two of you, he joked. Princess Alexis chuckled. You have a point. We do make lovely bait, don't we? We should work that into the next few ambush plans. If the enemy stops and gathers to talk to us, they make perfect targets for the mortar launchers. I didn't see any extremely off-target mortars. Were there any issues? Dax shook his head. No, they worked perfectly, and everyone was able to more or less guess where they were going to end up, even though it was their first shot. Very intuitive. However, they're nearly impossible to reload in the dark while on horseback. That's why we put them away and switched to rifles. Well, no weapon is perfect, but 100 against a 500-soldier patrol was far more than needed. Did you even all fire? Alexis asked. A few of the men still have their first round in reserve, but we put multiple mortars into the transports. Someone is going to realize that we didn't loot those soon, though. Dax replied. Alexis nodded. I'm counting on it. Have your scouts inform the locals that there are disabled trucks full of supplies here, and see what they do. If we're pushing their willingness to work with bandits too far, we can move on. However, if they're willing to loot the supplies for themselves, I say that we can trust them enough to stay a bit longer. Dax saluted her, then broke away to have one of his men send a message. They weren't far from the nearest village. The men there should be able to get here not long after first light and pretend to render aid to the survivors, while looting the convoy clean. The soldiers dropped them at camp, and Alexis clapped Dominic on the shoulder. And that's a job well done. Dagos will pay heavily for mistreating their citizens. Even after we leave, I wouldn't be shocked if the locals formed a new bandit group that started to make the tithe-gathering groups go missing. She announced. Chapter 174, On the Hunt. In the wilderness of southeastern Dagos, Prince Kaizan looked at the stack of reports that had been received in the last day. What is all this? Bandits, deserters, peasant uprising? How inept was the former king that things have gotten this bad in the east? He demanded of his advisor. Your Majesty, the nobles of this region were never wealthy, and they have suffered a decade of drought. Most spent every penny of their coffers to avoid starvation, then went off to war and didn't return. The siege at Burton alone killed 10,000 local peasants and many of their barons. The massacres outside Cleowe were even worse, and it is said that half the population of Midgex is buried in Signia now. The noble rulers are largely dead or young men of no accomplishments, and the populations are so depleted that the remainder of the peasants feel that they have been abandoned. Should we return to the capital and send a compliance army to the region to get things back under control before Signia's infiltration forces arrive? The advisor asked. No. The border spies say that the Natural Sons butchers are somewhere in this region, and if they're here, then Princess Alexis is here as well. Continue on this course and have the scouts ask about battles and reports of large bandit groups. Kaizan demanded. The advisor bowed and retreated so that the prince wouldn't see him roll his eyes. The prince might have strong political support, but that was in the capital. Out here, he had only a small retinue, under 1,000 men, and some of the peasant villages were close to that number. If they got caught up in a local uprising, they might be mired for days or weeks while the nation needed strong leadership. Advisor, I believe that we've found a sign of the Natural Sons. There was an attack by bandits, stripped the convoy searching for the princess clean. But when the scouts found the site, there were signs of explosives. Either the bandits have artillery, or there was a powerful mage with them. One of the Dago's royal guards reported. A powerful mage? Like a dragonkin? If he is there, then the princess is there as well. Bring the convoy to the site, and we will start our search for the wayward Signia Royal. The advisor decided. 2 hours later, their convoy was at the site of the battle, and Prince Kaizan was out with his advisor, examining the decaying bodies, which had now been set upon by wild animals. It was clear that they had been completely stripped of valuables, and the convoy was looted. These explosions, they're not magic. The leader of Prince Kaizan's guards declared. What do you mean? The prince demanded. Look here. There is shrapnel in the bodies. The grass is powder burnt. I can still smell it. And on these jackets, there are blast burns, along with fragmentation damage. They were not ambushed with magic, they were attacked with explosive cannon fire designed to make it look like they had died to magic. I fear that someone is baiting us into a trap, Your Majesty, he explained. Prince Kaizan sat down on the running board of his truck. If this wasn't the princess and her regiment, then where did she go? He muttered. There is some hope that it might be her. Many of the guards were shot with lead shot. Now, those could be any sort of rifle, but your agent was shot 12 times with a mana weapon. The guard captain suggested. The advisor walked over and shook his head. He was shot at point-blank range 12 times. Almost certainly a revolver. You can see how they continued to shoot as he was falling by the way that the wounds angle. That's personal. How so? The prince asked. A mana revolver holds 6 shots. He was shot 12 times and they took both his sword and scabbard, which suggests that he was not holding the weapon when he died. Most of the others still have the scabbards, as they're not valuable enough to resell. Whoever did this stopped to reload, then shot until the weapon was empty again. The advisor replied, Someone is definitely messing with us. It could be a robbery gone wrong, it could be a message. Who has a map? Where would they have been headed if they were ambushed here? Prince Kaizan asked. If they continued on the route that brought them here, they would pass the Ferneven River and into Albrol's territory. They've been moving almost perfectly straight away from Signia City if they came from the reported checkpoint incident here. It is possible that they're headed for the Duke's estate to install one of his relatives in the position to challenge for the throne. All his sons are dead, but his brothers have many sons and strong military merits of their own. If someone manages to stop their infighting, they could well challenge for the throne, especially with the tragedy in defense of the nation. The advisor noted. Prince Kaizan frowned. How many people live in Albrol City? 800,000, give or take. The advisor replied. Fuck. Prince Kaizan turned and punched the door of the truck. We can't afford the chance that they're headed to unite Albrols behind a political successor. Turn northwest and make for Albrol City. Call off the search for the princess for now, but keep sending me all reports of suspicious activity along with the banditry reports. Sir, we found the tracker. It took shrapnel from one of the explosions, which is what deactivated it. One of the royal guards reported. Understood. Everyone load up. We have work to do. The guards retreated from Prince Kaizan's temper. Nothing was going right for him lately. The king of Signia had laughed at him. One princess was missing, while the other taunted his armies from the walls of the capital, and now his search party had been ambushed by bandits with stolen military equipment. The advisors and officers knew that more likely than not, it was half-starved peasants from the next few villages up the road. But none of them would dare to tell the future king that the level of mismanagement was truly so bad that open rebellion was the status quo any time royal tax collectors passed through. Chapter 175. Vague Loyalties. 3 days after the last ambush, Dominic and Princess Alexis were ready to head out again. The locals had quietly collected the goods from the military convoy and disposed of the bodies. As far as Dominic could tell, they were more likely to be loyal to the bandits feeding them than to the lords who claimed dominion over the region. At least until the army showed up. That was what the natural sons would be preventing today. The last convoy going missing had stirred up trouble within the camp, with many reports of random punishments and increased training. From the viewpoint of the scouts and locals, it appeared that the camp overseers believed the entire unit had deserted. Your Highness, we have confirmed there were survivors from the attack, over 20 of them. Commander Dax reported. Princess Alexis gave him a sly smirk. Yet, The word never got back to the training camp that they were ambushed. Perhaps they aren't wrong to say that the unit deserted. Just not as many of them as they had thought. Then her face returned to her serious scowl, used only when doing strategic planning. As before, we will set up camp and pretend to be traveling nobles, but this time with a trio of guards. That should make it more believable. But this time we will attack in broad daylight, so don't expect to be able to keep up the element of surprise as easily. This is our target camping spot, just on the edge of a stand of trees, but 50 meters out, so it doesn't immediately look like we're trying to lure them in. I want 50 mortar men south of the road, hidden in the fields and hedges. The remainder of the strike team will be behind us. Once the attack starts, it is your judgment call whether to charge out, start with rifle fire, or continue to use the mortar launchers. Advisor Dominic has made quite a few of them, and most of you now have one in your possession. So, don't be stingy with the artillery. Daytime attacks should allow you to reload safely as well. This unit is larger than the last one, and they're not headed along the village route. They're headed towards Signia. They can't be allowed to pass. She reminded the unit. Understood. They responded in unison. Dominic and Alexis rode with their guards for the mission, who hid their mechanical horses in a crumbling barn next to an abandoned farmhouse 100 meters from where they were setting camp. That was close enough for a rapid retreat, but far enough that they wouldn't be noticed by the approaching military unit. Dominic started a small cook fire and began roasting some of the cured pork they had claimed from the soldiers' rations. If that didn't get the attention of the military unit, nothing would. They had looted the villagers dry. None of them would be expected to have meat of any sort. You there? Who are you, and why haven't you reported for military service? The leader of the approaching military unit demanded. I am Earl Nick of Totbu. What level of entitlement are you peasants on to assume that a titled and landed noble was subject to the draft? Dominic demanded. The unit commander spluttered for a moment. My father was Baron Orland of Venezia, a war martyr at the siege of Burton.
He stammered.
So, an untitled younger son, not a commoner? You should know better than to speak that way to your betters. Dominic retorted. Behind him, Dominic heard the guards chuckle. If this man didn't challenge him to a duel, he was definitely going to try to kill the advisor without the formalities of a duel. The rasp of steel on leather marked the moment that the commander drew his blade, and then a single crack of a pistol signaled the moment of his death. The commander toppled from his horse, and Dominic turned to the officer next to him. It seems that I have happened upon an entire unit of commoner revolutionists. He gasped with overly dramatic hand gestures, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The advisor enjoys killing Dago's soldiers a little too much. The rifleman on his left whispered. There is history between him and Dago's. Princess Alexis agreed, while the other commanders struggled to come to terms with the fact that their leader had just been shot dead half a day from the training camp, and by one of their own nobles. Capture them. The general will know what to do with them. One of the officers shouted. From out of the nearby bushes and long grass, 100 riflemen rose up, mortar launchers on their shoulders, and began to bombard the convoy. Then, from behind them, 400 more cavalry rushed past, firing into the survivors, while the front ranks switched to their rifles. You traitorous bastard! The surviving command officer realized, a full 10 seconds too late.
Goodbye.
Dominic agreed, as he ended the man with a single shot. He was getting better at that. The pistol was proving easier than expected to learn. Carefully, the rifleman who had dismounted for the ambush approached and began to search the bodies before dragging them off the road. Not a single storage cube to be found. Is there one among the officers? Commander Dax asked. Dominic checked the bodies and tossed the 2 that were on the convoy's leader to Dax. Load them up. All the supplies we can get, then weapons if there is space. Princess Alexis directed. Rapid hooves clicking on the road in the distance caught the attention of the scouts, and a shrill whistle went up. Everyone regroup. Get away from the road. Don't be spotted as you return to the ambush position. The attack has been noticed, but we're still going to take out the second group. Ambush team, retreat 100 meters north and prepare to engage the second wave. Reload in advance. Dominic ordered. Everyone shifted into position, and Dominic ran to the trucks, kicking them into gear and letting them drive over the evidence of the battle as they trundled down the road at an idle. That would confuse the enemy as to the location of the attack. Chapter 176. Overlapping Combat Zones. Alexis led their guards back to the abandoned farmhouse as Dominic pulled the last of the bodies off the road. The next group was approaching fast, too fast for him to join the group at the house. The best he could do was to put a dead soldier and a barrier over himself and lay down in the ditch. With a bit of luck, none of the mortars would land directly on him, but his area barrier should be enough to take the hit without any issues. One of the horsemen whistled as he skidded to a stop, and Dominic recognized a Signia mechanical horse above him, along with the colors of the Royal Army. The riflemen had seen the same thing, and they were hesitating to shoot. This might be one of their own units. Shit, I don't know what they ran into, but it was efficient. Someone go stop those trucks. The drivers are probably dead. Check the corpses for any usable intelligence. The leader of the group insisted. Dominic calculated the odds that this was a trap, and then rolled the body off himself before getting to his feet. Advisor? One of the soldiers asked, confused. Oh, you're ours then. Good thing we didn't shoot first, and ask questions later. What are you doing out here? Dominic asked. The 4th Reserve Regiment and the Biverlo Regulars have been assigned to take out Dago's training camp in the area. What are you doing out here alone? The colonel replied. Killing Dago soldiers, of course. But I'm actually with the Natural Sons Regiment. The idea is to make Dagos think that the princess fled the capital, so they send royals out to chase her. Dominic explained. And then your riflemen get to ambush Dago's royal guards and possibly finish off the royal lineage. That's brilliant. Evil, but brilliant. Dominic nodded. He liked when a man came to the right conclusions the first time. Don't attack the villages. They're just old people and cripples anyhow. The riflemen have been acting as benevolent bandits, and the locals have been covering for us. Dominic added, I don't see the riflemen. The colonel noted. Thank you. That's the point. But they're all within rifle range. If you want to search for intelligence on the bodies, go ahead. I didn't get time to fully strip them this time. We will attribute the kill to your team, and you can rejoin the assault on the training camp. The colonel smiled. You're a good man, advisor. And one hell of a field commander, if you manage this without a single dead rifleman. We haven't lost a man since Burton. But that's all on their own skills, not my orders. Dominic agreed. The soldiers quickly searched the bodies along the road, while a pair rode off to stop the trucks that Dominic had made idle away. Good work, advisor. We will report into the capital tonight after the base falls. The colonel informed him. I would thank you not to mention seeing us. The king knows where we are, and at the moment, he is the only one who needs to. Confirmed reports of our location and mission may cause Dagos to call off the search for the princes, and we want to lure them into the ambush. Dominic explained. Where should we watch for your men next? The colonel asked carefully, trying to make it obvious he just didn't want to end up in an ambush by his own allies. Once we are sure that they're not going to come all the way here to check in person, we will make our way to Albrol's. The city there is huge. It shouldn't take long to bait out some big fish with banditry in the region. Understood. Happy hunting. The soldiers finished up and rode away, hurrying to rejoin the other units for the attack. How long do you think it will take before someone reports in that we're in that Unriver region without the princess? Commander Dax asked as he left the ambush location. I give it about a week before the news is back to the Dagos royals. The question is whether they believe it or send out an entire army to come and make sure that she wasn't hiding nearby. Dominic replied. The better question is whether we want them to believe it or not. We could happily ambush soldiers all over Dagos if nobody was out looking for us. Dax reminded him. I can't argue with that. Those shoulder-fired mortars are stupidly effective. But we should clean up and leave before someone comes looking for us again. It was good luck that our men, and not the enemy, who heard the first battle, but they might have just been closest. The important bits were looted, and the regiment mounted up to return to their camp. Taking dozens of routes back, each with only a few riders, would make the area look well-traveled, but not a single well-worn path that would let anyone passing know that there was a large force in the ruins. Staying here much longer would make the routes in and out too well-traveled, but they were doing their best to cover the entrance with branches and greenery after the patrols passed. Once they were settled back into the camp, Dominic explained the situation to Princess Alexis, who called the leadership of the regiment to join them. "Gentlemen, the way that I see it, we have two choices. We can continue to work this area, hoping for soldiers to pass, or we can move west or northwest, where we know that there will be more soldiers moving down the major roads. That's the higher risk, higher reward option. I am leaning toward pushing Dagos to send an actual army against us. Cavalry-mounted artillery isn't anything that they're equipped to deal with, and we could cause massive destruction by the time that they adapted. Every force that we keep in the northeast of Dagos is a force that won't be headed to Signia. I have faith that my brothers will settle this war soon, and when they do, it would be to our benefit to have some merits to show for ourselves." She elaborated. It was solid logic. Dangerous, but potentially rewarding. Chapter 177. Cold Shoulder. In the ducal palace in Albrols, Prince Kaizan had not received the warm reception that he had been hoping for. "Your Highness, I believe that you may have overstepped your authority. The rightful leader of the nation is not you, but the eldest legitimate son of the former king. At the moment, the eldest legitimate son, who is not in enemy custody, is the Viscount Boscombe." The new Duke Albrols, brother of the deceased duke, announced in a cold tone. "I am still your regent, and you will behave as such." Prince Kaizan demanded. "Respectfully, Highness, you are not," and insisting that you are amounts to treason against the rightful king. Duke Albrols insisted. Prince Kaizan slammed his fist on the desk. "Does Boscombe have the political influence to take the throne? The armies to hold it?
No.
Think carefully about who you are siding with, because you can't take it back once I leave this room." Prince Kaizan insisted. Duke Albrols remained silent as the prince stormed out of the office and returned to his suite within the palace. From the back of the room, a muscular man with long black hair stepped out of the shadows. "Kaizan is rapidly losing his mind, but the army is still loyal to him. Or the commanders are, anyhow. At this point, who knows who the enlisted men owe allegiance to? But what I do know is that the king of Skipple refused to send aid until the new king is declared. West Kyria is threatening to join the war on the Signia side if Kaizan takes the throne before the war is over, and Axbridge sent our envoy back in 17 pieces," he announced, speaking softly but with authority. "Then what is our next move, Lord Boscombe?" Duke Albrols asked. "Let him lead his armies on a wild chase through the countryside for his intended bride. By the time that he realizes his mistake, I will be on the throne, and his head will be on a pike." Dominic was resting in bed with Princess Alexis, who was reading a fantasy novel, when the runners came in the next morning to give their reports. "We have news from the embedded scouts. The training camp is gone. The Signia army obliterated it last night with a combined air and ground strike. They are headed north up the river toward Staptenden, but the scouts report that there should be an entire train full of recruits that is almost to the camp. What are your orders?"
he asked.
Dominic and Alexis smiled at each other. "No change of plans. We will disable the train and deal with the soldiers on board, then free any forcibly recruited peasants who do not wish to fight. A few more bodies for the upcoming peasant revolts. There is no camp for them to be trained at, so they would otherwise be redeployed. Once that is finished, I believe we are done here, and we can head toward another target." Alexis ordered. "Understood, Highness. Are we sending the whole regiment, or just a scout team to stop the train?" Alexis paused, then smiled. "Send a small scout team. Blow the tracks, disable the locomotive, mortar the officers' cars, then let the recruits follow their conscience. I suspect that Dagos is about to implode under the weight of decades of neglect." The team was sent out immediately, so that they would have time to intercept the train from a suitable ambush point and escape largely undetected. So far, the Dagos army hadn't fully realized the extent of the activities in the area, but soon they would start to notice that everything was being destroyed, and it couldn't all be attributed to the Signia military force that had passed through. Soon, they would be attacking another target, and it would be clear that the actions of the Natural Sons were not the same unit. While they waited for the report, Dominic focused on repairing spare rifles with the new parts he was carrying, using the worn-out rifles from the siege as the base. This duty was closer to what they had expected the rifles to face, a few dozen shots once every few days. But Dominic wasn't going to risk them getting into another long battle without suitably reliable weapons. He was just finishing for the night when he noticed a change to his trade skill core. There was a single streak of blue, thin as a hair, along the front of the orb, the first signs of a journeyman level of skill. Soon, the trade skill knowledge locked inside and reserved for journeyman by Pops when he created it would unlock, and Dominic would learn a few new tricks of the forge. That may be a huge gain for him, but Dominic didn't know for certain what Pops had hidden for knowledge within the trade skill core. Each of them was individually made and intended to impart all the knowledge that a journeyman should need. But when that knowledge released and what was deemed essential were both left up to the master who created the core. "Sir, we have the reports. Today's haul was better than expected," the messenger from the regiment reported just before dark. "I thought that they were going to hit the train and then retreat?" Dominic asked. That was the plan. But when they hit the supply cart with a mortar, entire bags of mana cores spilled out. They sent in a strike team to recover them and found 20 bags of Signia Army-marked mana cores and 2 chests of essential skill gems in the supply cart of the derailed train. None of the gems are anything that we would need, but they brought them back to deny them to the enemy anyhow. No casualties or injuries on the strike team, but the casualties among the Dago's recruits were higher than expected. The plan to destroy the tracks met with a minor miscalculation, and the train continued another 500 meters along the rail bed before flipping and rolling down an embankment into the river. The messenger explained. Dominic sighed. He knew exactly what likely happened. They had targeted the track with explosives, and the train derailed, but momentum carried it in a straight line until something, likely an attack on the other train cars, upset the balance. Chapter 178. Low on storage. The skill and spell gems arrived moments later, along with the strike team, who had loaded themselves and their horses with supplies again. All of their storage items were full at this point, and they were carrying crates and bags on the mechanical horses. But they could give some supplies away as they traveled, earning goodwill from the civilians. Then they would restock from the next target they hit. Dominic took the boxes of gems and opened one to see what was actually in it. Spell gems of monster strength, spell gems of agility, and spell gems of sharpness. Literally, the most basic of spells that would be given to any common soldier to improve their basic physical attributes. Normally, they wouldn't even attempt to improve them with mana cores. They would just allow them to level up as they trained. By the time that they were through a 6-month training regimen, the spells would be at level 3, and they would be considered fit for duty as a city guard. Still, he recorded all 3 spells into the sorcerer's spellbook. More strength and agility were never a bad choice, and he did own a sword, so he might have use for sharpness one day. The second chest was the same as the first, and Dominic dropped the gems back into the box after checking them. The real treasures were the bags of mana cores. They weren't for monsters, they were the ones created by mages for the basic training of soldiers, equivalent to a level 1 or level 2 goblin core. Not individually impressive, but for recruits who had no base, it would help. They were also valuable to the soldiers here. Nobody had entry-level skills anymore, but you could drain the mana cores in combat instead of using your own mana. It wasn't considered a productive use of the items, but in an emergency, it was an option. Pass these out to the unit. There should be enough for everyone to have one, and then some spares. Bring what is left back to us for safekeeping. Dominic instructed. You don't need them for making munitions? The messenger asked. Dominic shook his head. I have thousands of rounds ready. I will have the regiment come and restock before we move. Just remind them that they need to keep space for their tents and camp equipment. We don't have extra vehicles to be loading down with gear that they should be carrying. That made the messenger chuckle. Not only did they not have extra vehicles, the ones that they did have were all overloaded and obviously of a foreign design, as the local steam trucks were a decade behind in their development. They could try to claim some of the damaged and discarded trucks from their future ambushes, but they would never be capable of keeping up with the regiment. The soldiers packed up everything that was non-essential before turning in for the night, and first thing in the morning after breakfast, They began sweeping the area of all signs that they had been camped for an extended stay. They were about to leave when Princess Alexis gathered the leadership to give last-minute instructions. I think that we have been going about this the wrong way. Signia already has soldiers in the region, and the military training camp is already gone. Forget having a good reason to be here. I believe that we're actually behind friendly battle lines at this point. Attacking Dago's deserters and civilians isn't our goal here, and it's not going to draw out the big fish that we need. So, I propose that we head northwest toward Aelwent. There is a keep there, and a city of nearly 50,000 without a wall. But the target isn't the city. We are going to set up on the road and become the most annoying highway bandits that Dago's has ever encountered. At first, we will head cross-country until we hit the highway near the coast. Then, find a good spot for ambushes and stop the Dago's army from moving soldiers east to intercept our forces who are taking Staptenden and Midgex. The destination is a few hundred kilometers north of the original plan, but if we push, we should be able to get there before the reinforcements sent from Albrolls and the northern peninsula arrive. She explained. Why not set up near the port at Peichelshauen? That is where they'll be sending their reinforcements by sea. Plus, it's just fun to say. Commander Dax suggested. The men of the regiment chuckled, while the princess rolled her eyes. No matter how much fun it is to say, that's less than 300 kilometers from Staptenden down an improved road. The forces coming down it will be larger than we can deal with safely, and setting up far enough from the city to avoid retaliation puts us dangerously close to the patrol lines of our own airships. She explained. One of the scouts cleared his throat. If we're going to go harass Aelwent, the crossing at the Skiptondel River would be a good spot. It's heavily forested. The road runs through a valley as it crosses the river, and it's so far from any major target that they shouldn't expect us. We would have to eliminate the bandit control units that are sure to be set up along the valley, but that's not a big deal. The scout offered. Devious, I like it. The fact that it's a known ambush spot and rife with bandits anyhow really helps sell our disguise. Only when they start losing entire military regiments will they realize that something is wrong. And that should bring a proper response, perhaps even from the scumbag prince himself. With half of the east falling to our forces, he's going to have to do something to prove his leadership. Alexis agreed. Dominic committed the new plan to memory and then gestured to a stack of mortars sitting along the side of the camp. Everyone grabbed 6 rounds. That should spread them evenly, and it's all we've got for now. As it turns out, giving everyone a mortar launcher requires an absolutely ridiculous amount of ammunition.
He joked.
The other officers he had given mortar creation orbs to gave him a sheepish look. That spell wasn't easy to activate, and only Dominic could make more than a few per minute. Don't worry, Lord Sorcerer. We will make every one of them count. Commander Dax assured him. It was hard not to, as effective as they were. Chapter 179. Desperate Times. The regiment was only 2 hours down the rutted dirt road when they came across the first village in desperate need of assistance. And these ones were truly desperate, Dominic decided, as they had tried to stop and rob the armed convoy with pitchforks. Even if they didn't all look half-starved, that would have been enough to let him know that they were hungry beyond the boundaries of common sense. So, he rode forward and raised his hand for the regiment to lower their rifles. Sirs, madams, I can see that you're in dire need of assistance, and unable to help yourselves if you're starved enough to try your hand at robbing a group of bandits. How about this? I will give you a passing grade for effort, a fail for execution, and we will donate 2 cured hams and a sack of rolled oats to your village as a consolation prize. Dominic suggested. Where did you even get those? Nobody has good meat these days, unless they've got a hog sow left that the king's men haven't taken for themselves. An old man demanded. From the army, of course. They were kind enough to donate a whole convoy of goods to our cause, along with their lives. Dominic explained. The old man gave him a toothless smile. I don't suppose you can make it 2 sacks of rolled oats? We've still got 2 months before the potatoes start to come in. Behind Dominic's shoulder, Dax laughed at the man's brazen request. His 20 senior citizens were facing 500 rifles, but they still wanted to negotiate. Someone bring up 2 sacks of rolled oats and 2 hams from the supplies. Our tribute to these brave villagers, who definitely never saw us pass, and had those supplies saved, didn't they? Dominic replied. Seen who now? My eyesight isn't what it used to be, the old man agreed. The rifleman's supply sergeant handed over the supplies, and an old woman hugged him with tears in her eyes. It was touching, and Dominic noticed that someone discreetly removed a crate of canned military rations and left them beside the road for the locals to pick up when they were gone. The convoy started moving again and saw more abandoned villages with every passing hour. Some recently, some years abandoned. But the drought had destroyed any chance of a decent crop everywhere that wasn't along a river, and even some of the riverbeds were dry. The further north they went, the more uninhabitable the land began to look, and even after half a day of travel, they didn't see any more signs of life among the scattered villages past the group of starving seniors. Should we search the houses to see if someone needs help? Commander Dax asked. Princess Alexis was about to answer, but Dominic shook his head.
No.
The men don't need to see what they're going to find inside those houses. If there is someone alive and in need of help, they will either make noise or come outside. Just have someone ride through the village. Dominic instructed. During his travels, he had seen enough villages depopulated by starvation or disease to know that even if you were desperate for shelter, it was a risk to your sanity going into any of the houses. Remind me again, why are we saving Dago civilians? One of the officers asked. Common decency mostly, but also so that we have a safe retreat route if things go wrong. If the villagers are on our side, we don't have to worry about them turning us into the authorities. Dominic explained. They camped along the abandoned road, not bothering to try to hide, as there was no sign of life within their scouting range for hours. Then, in the morning, they carried on, only to find more of the same, but the ground was getting sandier as they approached the ocean, even more unsuitable for crops. So, it was with great relief when they made it to the highway and the scouts encountered a small way station. Dominic rode ahead of the convoy, playing the part of Earl Nick of Totbu again now that they had encountered people who might no more noblemen than their own lord. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Dominic greeted them with 6 mounted riflemen at his back. Good afternoon, my lord. The man replied, but his hands said something different. What is a wave mate's scion doing in Dagos? The keeper of the carriage stopped sign discreetly. Dominic realized that he really needed to work on his disguise skills. Everyone seemed to recognize his lineage just by looking at his face, even with his horns covered. I don't suppose that there is a clean well in town? We could use a spot to wash up after a long ride. Dominic replied. Killing Dago's nobles for fun and profit, of course. Dominic signed back as he spoke. The well here isn't great. Too close to the ocean, the water is salty. But it will get the grime off, and it won't hurt the horses. Best of luck to you, my prince. There are soldiers headed east twice a day. If you have the men, you can hit them in the valley to the west. We will head down the road, then. Thank you for your help. Dominic replied, then turned and rode away, with a group of confused riders behind him. Once they were back at the regiment, the riders finally spoke up. What sort of conversation was that? You only asked him about the well, then left. How do we know that they're not going to turn us in to the next convoy to pass? He demanded. He was speaking Wavemate sign language or trade guild hand signals, as they're the same. He is on our side. According to the man at the station, there are military convoys twice a day down the highway, always headed east. That should be toward the battles in the cities. We might as well get in place and eliminate anyone left guarding the valley he spoke of before the next one comes along. It wouldn't do to have to engage them out in the open. Dominic explained. The map showed that there was a canyon that led to the river, and that would have to be the valley that they were looking for. There was only one major road in the area, and it was also the only bridge over the Fenevan River anywhere near them. Princess Alexis motioned for them to send out teams, and Commander Dax began giving the orders to spread to either side of the road, so they could take both sides of the valley at once with minimal resistance. The trucks would stay on the south side, so they didn't get trapped between the canyon and the ocean, but the regiment would have to split, so that they could properly ambush anyone coming over the river. Chapter 180. Canyon Ambush Site. Dominic led the assault on the south side, while Commander Dax led the north side. The Dagos army had left one camp of guards in place on the east side of the river, at the entrance to the canyon, but there were only 10 men, all drunk and none on guard duty when Dominic arrived. Pistols are quieter, he whispered as the strike team spread out. None of the Dago's soldiers even saw their death coming. From across the canyon, Commander Dax signaled that they had also cleared the guards and that they were settling in to wait for the next convoy to cross the river. I'm almost starting to feel bad for them at this point. They're stretched so thin, and the country is in so much worse shape than we thought. It feels like we're bullying them, not the other way around. Princess Alexis noted as they prepared to intercept the next convoy along the road, which was already coming into sight on the horizon. Dominic didn't reply right away, but as they watched the convoy cross the river, he couldn't help but agree with her assessment. A single soldier wearing a Dago's army coat was enough to assure the soldiers that all was well, and the convoy didn't even space themselves out for safety. Their steam trucks were overloaded, so they had chained them together, allowing the light ones at the front carrying nothing but their officers to pull the others up hills. Because an extended chain was just more failure points, they were nearly bumper to bumper when the mortars began to rain down on them, and the majority of the force never even made it out of the trucks. With the transports disabled, the riflemen launched volley after volley into the survivors until nothing moved in the valley. Good work, gentlemen. Send down a cleanup crew and have a pair of trucks hooked to the front to pull the scrap off the road. All rifles keep ready. There might be soldiers hiding in the vehicles. Princess Alexis ordered. The bodies of the Dago's vehicles were over 10 meters long and slender, looking more like a hybrid of a rail car and a carriage than the shorter, tractor-based vehicles that were more popular in Signia. But that gave the passengers a better chance of survival when the vehicle was disabled by mortar fire. There were so many obstacles between a blast at the front and passengers in the back that there were chances for them to escape relatively unharmed. The bravest would have gone out to fight, but many might still be hiding in the wreckage, and destroying it any further would only make it harder to remove from the roadway. Their time was limited, so some risks would need to be taken, but the cleanup crew would have to be careful. Come out with your hands raised, and we will let you leave. We're not interested in killing all of you and needing to bury the bodies. One of the cleanup crew called. After a few seconds, a group of soldiers in blood-stained uniforms kicked open the door of a truck and made a run for it, headed east up the hill. That wasn't the direction they came from, but the one that they were going. Why they thought that might be better was a mystery to Dominic, but from his vantage point, he could see when they cleared the gorge and turned south, running inland. That was an even worse decision. Everyone in that direction had already starved to death, and the wells were mostly dry. But when more of the survivors joined them, the regiment simply let them run. Even if they turned back west at some point to cross the river, they wouldn't be able to tell anyone about the ambush for days, and there should be 2 more convoys tomorrow. The cleanup crew banged on the side of all the damaged trucks, and a few heavily wounded stragglers emerged at the windows, unable to leave under their own power. The cleanup crew took the time to find medical kits and either helped them bandage their wounds or let them do it themselves, then gave them a pack and sent them on their way. The soldiers looked suspicious at the generosity until they saw that the regiment's trucks were towing everything away. This wasn't a simple robbery for food. They were being picked clean to arm a bandit group. The Dago's vehicles were pulled off the road after the bodies that had made it outside were loaded. There was still some destruction, but not as much as Dominic had expected, and everyone settled in to wait for the next convoy and loot this one, looking for anything worth taking. They would scrap and burn it when they left, but first they wanted to make sure that they had all the food, usable magitech, and other valuables out. The regiment was getting exceedingly efficient at the process, and when the scout whistle, the call of a great horned owl, which wasn't native to Dagos, alerted them to movement along the road, they were already finished. This second convoy was actually well guarded, and Dominic called for Princess Alexis to join them when he saw the fancy heraldry on the vehicles. Is that someone important? Like, important enough not to hit his truck with a mortar? Dominic whispered. Alexis sighed. Yes, he's important enough not to hit with artillery. You really do need to learn all the livery symbols one day. That is the Viscount Boscombe. His army has nearly 100,000 men, and his home city numbers over 500,000. He's definitely important, even if he's not generally considered quite close enough to take the throne for himself.
No, wait.
Not counting the princes that we have in custody and the ones we killed in the first phase of the war, Viscount Boscombe is the next in line for the throne if he wants it. We need him, or whoever is in that carriage alive. Dominic sent the hand signal to the other side of the gorge, and everyone moved into position, ready to stop the convoy, which was surrounded by soldiers.